Good evening, folks, or good morning for those in South Africa. I suppose good morning for the rest of us, too. It's after midnight here on the 10th of March, 2026. Some folks are a bit concerned with the reports by Reuters that the U.S. Embassy has erected a mobile village to process refugees, potentially up to 4,500 per month. The concern is not that they're processing more refugees, potentially, but that this is in Pretoria, and that would be the only location where people will be processed for refugees in future. That may very well be the case. I cannot confirm or deny that at this stage, but it seems a reasonable conclusion, which is something I pointed out in my original analysis of this a few weeks ago when we found out if this was the story. I said it seems that that may be the case. Now, some South Africans are saying it's heartless of the United States to do this. They don't appreciate the suffering or the challenges, the financial burden on families traveling all the way to Pretoria from all over a country larger than Texas. Well, you're mistaken. And your blame or your frustration is being pointed in the wrong direction. The only place to place blame for this is at the feet of the Department of Home Affairs and the South African government. It's the South African government that, knowing full well what was going on at Woodmead, because the U.S. government requested diplomatic authorization for its officials to travel there, stated what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They knew where they were doing it at. They were aware of the lease. The U.S. government had to coordinate security with the South African government because diplomatic operations were taking place at a leased facility. This is a matter of diplomatic protocol. This was all done in accord with the Vienna Convention. The South African government knew all of this, and they chose on the 16th of December, Unification Day or Reconciliation Day, Geloftedag, they chose, the day of the vow, to take off-duty Home Affairs officers in fatigues, in uniform, and raid a U.S. diplomatic site, endangering the safety of everyone there, including U.S. diplomats, whom they illegally detained, and then illegally doxed their personal information, including their birth dates and their origins, and denied it. If you're angry and upset about this process, you must understand that at an abundance of caution, because of the inability of the South African government to adhere to the Vienna Convention, the United States had no choice but to consider the safety of its own personnel and of refugee aspirants, because the South African government specifically intentionally undermined the Vienna Convention. Therefore, the U.S. government had no choice but to do this. Now, this is a stark contrast to the past, where the United States has sent people from Church World Service through its RSC, that's the Regional Support Center, from Kenya to South Africa. I've even interviewed one of them, an American who worked for RSC in Kenya, who was sent to South Africa to process refugees several years ago. But not South Africans, Kenyans, Congolese, and others from around Africa to process them. Refugees who fled to South Africa, which doesn't even border on their countries, lived in South Africa, were granted refugee status, and then South Africa gladly let the U.S. come there and process them with Kenyans and others to send them to the United States and dump them in our country. But when the U.S. offers sanctuary through a refugee program for South Africans fleeing from racial persecution in South Africa, the South African government chooses to pretend that they discovered some great intelligence and had a big sting and discover where this operation was. That is the largest pile of balderdash one could possibly speak of. This location was known to the South African government. The personnel that were working there were known to the South African government. They were declared. They don't go to the country. I know how this works. I worked in diplomatic circles. I had diplomatic passports. You don't just go to a country without clearance. You must have clearance. You must get a diplomatic visa to do this, and your intentions must be clearly declared. And that's what happened. The U.S. personnel that were illegally detained that day and their identities compromised, or the identity compromised, those people have been in country for weeks. They didn't arrive that day before. And as far as the Kenyans working illegally, that's a load of poppycock too. They came there on a visa, tourist visa, and applied for a work visa once they arrived. Perfectly normal function to do. It was denied. The denial was sent to them where they were residing at in South Africa. They appealed it. It went for another review. It was ultimately denied again. Final denial. But the denial wasn't given to the Kenyans or to the Americans who had them there working through their contractor, RSC. The denial was sent to Nairobi, to the South African High Commission. Why? The Kenyans aren't working in Nairobi. They were working in South Africa. And the South African Department of Home Affairs knew that. This was done intentionally as a pretext to say that they had refused to leave the country, which is total nonsense. The reason why you may have to go to Pretoria from Uppington or Knysna or from Kailicha or from Monenberg or from Polokwane or from Nelspruit is because the South African government violated the sanctity of the Vienna Convention. Done and dusted, finished and clar. The U.S. government is trying to provide safety for the refugee applicants. They can't guarantee that at a site they don't have control of when the government of South Africa refuses to adhere to the very convention that it cites constantly when it claims it's a sovereign power. And instead of working to build relations with the United States, last week, President Ramaphosa gave an interview in the New York Times in which he consistently, repeatedly called Donald Trump a racist and misled the public about the program, claiming it's a racist program. A racist program that brings whites, coloreds, Indians, and even some black South Africans to America. How is that racist? It's not. It's balderdash. So if you're a refugee aspirant and you're frustrated, I appreciate your frustration. But your anger needs to be directed towards Lutuli House and Ronald Lamola and Leon Schreiber and Cyril Ramaphosa, not Donald Trump, the U.S. Embassy, or USCIS. Because the reason for this is your safety and our American citizen safety, as well as the local nationals who work for us. Simple as that. What say you, South Africa? Mzansi? Cheers.